请大家各就各位我们就要开始今天的主题活动好，各就各位。
Those of you who would like to try and understand more about our service today, we'll give you a quick introduction. For the first time in the history of Singapore, a Singaporean who is ordained in the Thai Buddhist tradition has been honored by His Majesty the King of Thailand with the conferment of the ecclesiastical title of Chao Khun. The full word is Chao Khun Sama. This is in recognition of his personal practice of the Dhamma, his leadership of his fellow monks, his support and assistance to his fellow monks, and his Dhamma Dutta or missionary activities among the people of Thailand, Singapore and Malaysia. This Singaporean is none other than our Phra Ajaan Keng, Khemako. He was also appointed the president of our temple's board of management during this year's annual general meeting. For those who like to know, the Thai Buddhist order has a system of recognition of the contribution of monks by honoring them with ecclesiastical titles. There are three categories of titles, and these are Prakru Sanyabat or Prakru commonly known, Phra Ratchakana or Chao Khun, and Somdet Phra Ratchakana or most commonly we refer to it as Somdet. Within each of these categories are different grades or levels. In the Prakru category, there are 53 grades. The Chao Khun category has 6 grades, and the Somdet category has 2 grades. There are a small number of monks appointed as Somdet, and among them, they will appoint a Sankaraja or a Supreme Patriarch of Thailand. In recognition of his contributions to the Sangha, the lay community, and his missionary work for the promotion of Buddhism, Phra Ajaan Keng was appointed a Tanak Ukrom, which is an assistant to Somdet Phra Vanarat of Wat Bowon, and conferred the title, this is a very long title, Phra Kru Palat Sampit Patana Sutachan Yanakoson Vimon Silachan Maha Kanitan Kana Tikan Mayok Vitok Tamak Rakit of Taman Yutika sect on the 17th of September this year at Wat Bowon. It is a very pleasant surprise to every one of us that within this same year, the Sangha authorities on the 5th of December again gave him further recognition when they recommended him for the conferment of the title of Chao Khun by the royal household. This is very unusual in that he was moved so quickly within a few months of receiving the Chao Khun title. So this is a very special occasion for all of us as Singaporeans. As such, a recognition is very rare among Thais even, not just Singaporeans or foreigners. Of course, there are exceptions. In the Sangha order, there are also foreign monks who were made Chao Khun immediately and not having to go through the Prakru title. The lay community has decided that we should celebrate and recognize Phra Ajaan Keng's contributions to the Buddha Sasana and the people of Thailand, Singapore and Malaysia. In Thailand, the different communities celebrate such an occasion in different ways. For example, some communities, they will have a wayang performance for 7 days. And so in our case, we cannot afford the 7 days celebrations. This morning celebration is a combination of secular and religious activities. We will first celebrate it in a Singaporean and Malaysian Chinese way with lion and dragon dance. In Buddhism, the lion and dragons have significance. The Buddha was known as a lion amongst men, as he was the first to conquer his mental defilements and discover the path to enlightenment. The dragon or the Nagas are a class of beings who protect the teachings of the Buddha. After that, we will invite the Sangha and Phra Ajaan Keng into the main shrine hall, and that's when the religious activity will start. Please note that we have more than 50 monks here today, and because of the small size of our hall, we cannot accommodate everyone. So only the Sangha will be allowed into the hall. The rest of us will watch the proceedings from the 2 large TV screens outside. As the events will unfold quite quickly, we will not have much commentary during the event. So I'll give you an idea of what will take place in the hall afterwards. After Phra Ajaan Keng has paid his respects, once Phra Ajaan Keng goes into the hall and having paid his respects to the Buddha and the Sangha elders, he'll be invited to an appointed seat in the middle of the hall. Ching Hua, Nina and myself will read the royal decree from His Majesty the King of Thailand, and we'll do it in English, Chinese and Thai. Thereafter, the Sangha will rejoice by chanting the Jayanto or stanzas of victory. Once this is over, Phra Ajaan Keng will offer his thanks to the Sangha by giving them tokens of appreciation. He will then dedicate merit to his relatives, friends and all beings by pouring the water of dedication of merits. After this is done, there will be a group photo session for the Sangha. Now, in light of the tight time frame, the group photo session for the Sangha will be done after the meal. The Sangha will then proceed to the dining hall for the meal offering. Again, the hall is very tight and will be filled with Sangha members, so only the helpers helping out in the dining hall will be there. The rest of us will have to stay out of the hall. You're invited to join the communal offering of food to the Sangha, and thereafter we can proceed to have a buffet lunch at the site here. Okay, please don't go home yet, because after the lunch at around 1 p.m. We will gather again in the main shrine hall, and Ajahn Jeff or Ajahn Thani Sarobiku will be invited to give a English Dhamma talk to us, and then Phra Ajaan Keng will present a memento for this celebration to all of you. Okay. Now we thank you for taking your time to join us in this celebration. It's significant and it's a proud occasion for all of us. And we ask your forgiveness should there be any shortcomings or inconveniences on the part of the organizing team. On behalf of Wat Palilai and Wat Santi of Johor, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the Sangha for gracing the occasion, as some of them have come from the USA, Thailand and Malaysia. We must also recognize and thank all of our volunteers and sponsors who gave so freely of their time, effort and donations to make this event such a success. Now, I'll now pass over to Ching Hua, who will give you the speech in Chinese.
各位信徒佛友早上好，今天是巴里来一个特别喜庆的日子，也是新加坡一个特别喜庆的日子。在新加坡的历史，这是第一次有新加坡人在传统泰国佛教受戒的僧人荣获由泰国国王殿下分发的昭君的这个封号。这是为了表扬他个人对佛法的实践，他对同胞的支持、协助、领导，而他在泰国、新加坡、马来西亚的人做这个宣传正法的工作。这个新加坡人无非就是我们尊敬的延祥法师，就是阿占廷。今年的常年大会，延祥法师也被委任为本师管理董事会的主席。泰国有一个表扬僧人的这个系统，他们会根据这个僧人的这个贡献来给他们一些职称，总共有3类。第一类是让步，第二类是招棍，第三类是总结。暂停一下吧。我继续哦，你们每个类别有不同的等级或层次。让步类别中有13个等级，招棍类别有5个等级，而总结类别有5等级，也有少数等级。其中一个会被定于升华。 边有几项不要的事项，跟大家讲一下哦。等一下我们的游行队伍哦，会从这个后面的卡巴开始哦，前面有舞龙舞狮，然后接下来有这个师傅，还有后面的这些拿礼物的这些信众哦，他们会从侧门走出去，然后从前门进来。前门我们有我们的小孩子他们会撒花迎接这个师傅，然后你们两旁也可以鼓掌欢迎师傅的到来哦。那么之后呢？师傅将会进来这边哦，这边有这个位置，在我的右手边，师傅会坐在那边观礼哦。观礼完之后呢，师傅还有这些长老们，他们会坐在这边观礼。之后呢，他们就会进入大厅哦。那么由于我们的大厅的面积有限哦，只能够允许师傅他们进入我们这边差不多有50到60位师傅哦，所以请大家呢。观礼的时候，就在我的右边有2个这个TV 电视机在那边观看那么大概的情形，师傅在大厅的这个会举行一些宗教的仪式他会礼敬三宝，之后他会我们Sebastian 我还有这个妮娜会念这个国王所颁发的这个诏文他的旨意，然后呢，接下来师傅们会念这个占卜。然后回向分享功德，那么大厅的这个宗教仪式完毕之后呢，师傅们会去这个我们的这个祠堂用这个膳食那么祠堂的这个面积也是有限，所以你们也只能在外面观看随喜赞叹。如果你们有买东西来供养师傅的话，请你们交给我后面前面那个四面神后面的这个帐篷那边如果你们买东西来供养师傅 ，OK， 那么这个就是大概我们今天早上的这个节目。那么下午呢，还有一个更重要的节目，请大家不要离开下午1点12点多左右，师傅们会拍这个团体照，然后之后1点呢。有这个师傅会给这个国学讲座，那么之后呢，我们的延祥法师呢就会颁发礼物给大家所以大家要来向延祥法师祝贺的话，记得了下午1点要出席，好不好？大概的情形就这样我们的时间有限，现在由我们的妮娜与泰语跟大家讲一下。
นมัสการพระคุณเจ้าและสวัสดีพี่น้องพุทธศาสนิกชนทุกท่านวันนี้พวกเรามีความปิติยินดีที่ได้มาอยู่ในงานสมโภชครั้งนี้ซึ่งนับเป็นครั้งแรกในประวัติศาสตร์ที่พระสงฆ์ชาวสิงคโปร์ได้รับพระกรุณาโปรดเกล้าจากพระบาทสมเด็จพระเจ้าอยู่หัวทรงพระราชทานเลื่อนสมณศักดิ์ท่านขึ้นเป็นพระราชาคณะท่านเจ้าคุณพระวินัยธรรมวิเทศซึ่งถือเป็นเพื่อเป็นกำลังใจและยกย่องในการปฏิบัติธรรมของท่านการอุทิศตนเผยแพร่พระพุทธศาสนาความสามารถเป็นผู้นำปกครองหมู่คณะสงฆ์ช่วยเหลือและอนุเคราะห์งานต่างๆเป็นที่ศรัทธาของประชาชนชาวไทยชาวมาเลเซียและชาวสิงคโปร์ซึ่งพระสงฆ์รูปนั้นไม่ใช่อื่นใครแต่ท่านคือท่านพระอาจารย์เข่งเขมักโกครูบาอาจารย์ของพวกเรานั่นเองหลังจากที่เนื่องจากเวลาเราไม่พอนะคะก็ขอช็อตคัทหลังจากที่เรานิมนต์พระเถระและคณะพระสงฆ์เข้าสู่พระวิหารประกอบพิธีกรรมทางศาสนาเนื่องจากมีพระสงฆ์มากกว่า50รูปเราเกรงว่าพื้นที่จะไม่พออย่างไรก็ตามขอประชาชนทั่วไปพุทธศาสนิกชนทั้งหลายสามารถชมพิธีกรรมผ่านจอทีวีด้านนอกทั้ง2ด้านนะคะเมื่อท่านอาจารย์เข่งเข้าสู่วิหารจะจุดธูปเทียนบูชาพระรัตนตรัยและสักการะพระเถระหลังจากนั้นประธานคารวาสอ่านพระบรมราชโองการแต่งตั้งสมณศักดิ์พระสงฆ์เจริญพระชัยมงคลชยันโตจากนั้นท่านเจ้าคุณจะถวายจตุปัจจัยไทยธรรมะและกรวดน้ำหลังจากนั้นพวกเราร่วมการถวายพระทหารเพลแด่พระสงฆ์ณหอฉันและซึ่งจะมีแต่พระสงฆ์และเจ้าหน้าที่เท่านั้นนะคะเราได้จัดอาหารบุฟเฟ่ต์สำหรับประชาชนทั่วไปณด้านข้างของพระวิหารหลังจากนั้นเวลาบ่ายโมงตรงท่านเจ้าคุณพระอาจารย์เข่งหรือท่านพระอาจารย์เจฟฟี่จัดแสดงธรรมเทศนา ให้พวกเราณวิหารและแจกของที่ระลึกพวกเราขอขอบคุณทุกท่านที่ได้สละเวลาร่วมงานฉลองงานสำคัญในครั้งนี้ถ้าเราได้ทำการผิดพลาดใดๆไปตกหล่นบกพร่องใดข้าพเจ้าขออภัยมาณที่นี้และขอขอบคุณเจ้าหน้าที่จิตอาสาทุกท่านที่ทำให้งานนี้สำเร็จและขอต้อนรับเข้าสู่งานฉลองสมโภชในครั้งนี้สาธุค่ะ
Okay, now we celebrate สาธุสาธุสาธุเก่งนิมนต์ครับนิมนต์ครับ Help us please invite the Sangha out. We will now invite the Sangha out to the viewing area. The Sangha elders will be seated and the rest of the Sangha will be at the rank.
好 ，testing。我们现在请长老师傅们出来观礼。8点半我们就。
8点半8点半ซ้อมบุญ8点半
然後就實了啦。
这边是顺便让大家知道一下我们今天的这庆典呢，很荣幸的我们请到美国、泰国、马来西亚还有新加坡的一些高僧上学来观礼
Okay, ready? Repeat. Yep.
Our procession will now begin.
Go. Hey. Okay. Pick up. 来 เ
接下来应该是我们的舞狮队伍呈现表演了啊。
Next comes our lion dance.
Thank you.
เ
师们到大厅。
Now we will invite the Sangha and the into the hall.
ขอให้พระเถระและคณะสงฆ์เข้าสู่พระวิหารประกอบพิธีทางศาสนา
Now, like we said earlier, because of the hall, you will only be watching it from the TV screens on the side of the building. So please gather at the tent at the side, then you can see the proceedings on the TV screen.
因为我们的大厅有限只容许师傅进入而已，所以请你们到我的右边电视机观看里面进行的仪式啊，我的右边右边。那么刚才那个舞狮啊，他排出的这个好菜都是什么？洪德为公啊，洪德为公 ，OK， 功德的功，OK 好吧 ，OK 所以请你们要观看那个宗教仪式的，请到我的右手边右手边。好，我们现在请我们的莲香法师进入大殿。
นิมนต์ท่านเจ้าคุณพระอาจารย์เข่งจุดธูปเทียนบูชาพระรัตนตรัยและสักการะพระเถระหลังจากนั้นประธานคารวะอ่านพระบรมราชโองการการแต่งตั้งสมณศักดิ์
静默，你让他们。
我们也请这个莲香法师的父亲还有母亲大殿来
of the King's Council of Monks in the name Phra Khemako, taking on the duties of the Buddhist religion, being responsible for guiding and instructing, settling any issues that arise, and giving assistance to the monks and novices in his monastery as is appropriate. May he grow in happiness and well-being in the Buddhist religion. Beginning the 5th of December, the 2556th year of the Buddhist era, the 68th year of the current reign, signed from the Phra the King of Thailand, the decree of by Prime Minister.
这个华语讲给这王国的主义，马来西亚灵性师的莲香法师阿三佩，拉夫巴拉巴提巴拉普拉江，自认为 现在我们进行的呢是由阿长梅香法师亲自的奉献礼物给诸山长老。接下来我们的银行老师将会提供礼物给银行老师的给其他的老师哦。
on by one day. One day, night. now that外面的人，外面人就有个小动作。
好，现在我们的这个庆典的重要仪式进行到这边，然后接下来呢，我们将会有一个这个生团的敬礼照，好，在这里拍好。
ขอนิมนต์พระเอกนะคะทรงสมา
Can you hear me in the back of the room? Yes. Try to speak slowly. I'd like everybody to close your eyes and meditate for a bit. We had a lot of activity and excitement this morning. And it's good to remember why we have a monastery, why we have monks, why we have titles for monks. It's because all of us need to find peace inside. This is what the teaching is all about. It's the fact that true peace can be found inside our own minds. So close your eyes, focus on your breath, watch it come in, go out. We're here because we're celebrating Keng's new title as a Ajaan. We're very happy for him, and more than just being happy for the new title, we're happy because he earned the title. There are basically three kinds of Ajaans. The ones who want to be Ajaans and buy the title. The ones who want to be Ajaans and do good to get the title. And the ones who don't care, but they do good and other people recognize them. And we're proud because Keng falls into the third category. He's been dedicating himself to the practice for 27 years now as a monk. Before that, he practiced several years as a layperson. And he didn't do it because he wanted a title, he didn't do it because he wanted recognition. He did it because he saw that he was suffering. He needed to find a way out of his suffering, and this was the only way. And so he dedicated himself to the practice. Whatever the Dharma and the Vinaya required, he was willing to do that because he realized that it was for his own good. Even if it required that he give up personal comfort, sometime he went through many, many difficulties. He had a Western Ajaan, who was very difficult. Then he had other Thai Ajaans, who were also very difficult. And then he had the forest, which is probably the most difficult Ajaan of all. I didn't starve him when he was with me, but the forest would starve him many times. And he was able to stick with the practice, though, because he realized the most important thing in life was the peace of mind, the training that comes from dedicating yourself to the practice. So we're here to express our empathetic joy for the fact that other people now have recognized the goodness that he's done, because he hasn't done good only for himself, but he's been a good example for many people from Singapore, from Malaysia. For 3 years he helped me in America train the Western monks. So basically he's given his life to the sasana, he's given his life to the religion, both in terms of his own practice and hopes that other people would also benefit from the practice as well. And so we should take that as a good example, because when you do good, when you train your own mind, you are helping other people. When you help other people, you are training your own mind. As the Buddha said, when you train your own mind, you're developing mindfulness, awareness, overcoming your own greed, aversion, and delusion. And you're not the only person who benefits. If you have less greed, aversion, and delusion in your actions, the people around you will benefit as well. At the same time, when you treat other people with kindness, generosity, when you show patience with difficult people, equanimity in cases where that's the best thing you can do. Not only are you helping them through your kindness and patience, but you yourself are developing good qualities of mind. This is why the Buddha's teachings are so special, why the form of happiness that he teaches is so special because it doesn't create divisions. It doesn't make the fact that your happiness has to depend on someone else's losing something. In the ways of the world, there's gain and there's loss, there's status, loss of status, there's praise, criticism, there's pleasure and pain. When you find happiness in those, areas, there's going to be divisions, there's going to be conflict. If you gain something, other people have to lose. If you gain status, other people have to lose that status. If you gain praise, other people may criticize. So you have to be very careful about trying to find too much happiness in that area. Try to find happiness more in the area of practicing generosity, practicing virtue, and practicing meditation. Because the gains you get here don't require that anyone else lose anything. In fact, everybody gains. This is why it's good not to practice. Now, as I said earlier, we're here because we're celebrating Keng's new title. And it's good to think about the name that they gave him. Most often with Chao they either have old names that they recycle. The old Chao dies and then they take his name and give him to a new Chao. Or else they make up a new name that is appropriate for the new Chao. In this case, they gave Keng a name that was special to him. He's the first Chao we take that's ever been. So, Dhamma, Vinaya, and Dhamma, we know what those mean. It's Buddhist discipline for the monks, discipline for lay people, and then the Dharma that he taught. And Videsa, that comes as his name, but we take means abroad or in another country. And so there are two ways you can understand that. There's a good way to understand that and a bad way. The bad way is thinking, okay, now that we're bringing the Dharma to Malaysia and Singapore, we need a special way of changing the Dharma to fit in with people in Malaysia and Singapore. That's the wrong way of thinking. The right way to think is that we're taking the standards of the Dharma, which are the standards of noble ones, and not Indian customs or Thai customs, but the customs of the noble ones. And trying to bring those and establish them here, in this part of the world as well. So that's the second meaning of the name, which is the meaning that you take to heart. And the customs of the noble ones. There's a story that when Ajaan was first practicing in Thailand, following the Thaganga practicing out in the forest, people would accuse him of not following old Thai customs or old Laotian customs. And he said he was not interested in following Lao customs or Thai customs. He wanted to follow the customs of the noble ones. If you want to become a noble one, you have to follow their customs. What are those customs? The first three have to do with contentment. Being content with what you have in terms of your clothing, content with what you have in terms of your food, content in terms of what you have with your shelter. Now these things go against the way of most people. Most people get a certain amount of food, they want more. They get good clothing, they want better clothing. They get good homes. They had good homes 20 years ago, they have better homes now. People keep wanting to get better and better and better and focus so much of their time and energy on getting more of these things. They neglect devoting energy to developing the mind. And so the Buddha said you learn how to be content with your physical surroundings and learn to be not content with where your mind is in the practice. As long as your mind hasn't reached the end of suffering, you want to continue to get better and better in the practice. So that's the first three customs of the Buddha. It's content with the food, content with the clothing, content with the shelter, as you get them. And you learn how not to be proud of the fact that you get a lot less from the people, because you realize that you're practicing this for the sake of overcoming your own suffering. You're not doing it to impress anyone else, you're not doing this to show off. You're doing this because your mind needs to be content with these things. So you can have more time and energy to devote to the real issue of life, which is why everyone wants happiness, but everyone does things that cause suffering. We want to look into our own minds to see why we're doing this, what's the ignorance that causes us to create something even though nobody wants something. That's what we have to devote our energies to. That's what the last of the customs of the noble ones is, which is to delight in developing the good qualities that will lead to the end of suffering, and delight in abandoning the bad qualities or unskillful qualities that cause us to continue suffering. But the good qualities are the qualities of the path. Virtue, there's concentration, there's discernment, And for many of us, these practices go against the grain. Ask people to sit and meditate for 2 hours and then complain. How can I do that? But get painful. It's going to be pain in my legs, pain in my back. And yet you can sit for 2 or 3 hours and watch a movie and nobody complains at all. In fact, if it's only a 90-minute movie, you complain that the movie was too short. You spent a lot of money on that movie, you wanted to see more. But what we want here is to learn how to delight in the fact that you are overcoming your fear of pain, you're overcoming your fear of any kind of physical discomfort. You don't have to learn how to delight in these things. At the same time, you want to learn how to delight in letting go of your greed, aversion, and delusion. Again, for most of us, greed, aversion, and delusion we consider to be our friends. They go with us everywhere we go, they talk to us all the time, tell us what to do, and we tend to believe them even more than we believe our friends. You have craving that tells you to go out and buy something, you believe it. It tells you to go travel someplace, you believe it. You believe it better than your own friends. And that the Buddha says you have to learn how to see craving as a false friend. Your true friend is looking into your suffering and understanding why you're doing it. And developing the path, qualities of virtue, concentration, and discernment that will help you see clearly, okay, this is why I'm suffering, this is how I can put an end to suffering. So you want to learn how to delight in putting effort into the practice, find ways of encouraging yourself. Again, here we can take Keng as an example. If he sits for 3 hours, he makes himself sit for 4 hours, then 5 hours. And he comes and delights in doing that. When you take delight in that kind of thing, then you learn how to give yourself energy in the practice. Instead of complaining about the pain, you look at, okay, what can I do to put an end to this pain? What can I do to overcome it? And take it as a challenge. Take it as a challenge that you are eager to meet. When you are eager to meet these challenges, okay, then you find delight in the practice and you're entering into the customs of the noble ones. These are the customs that raise us beyond being just Malaysian or Singaporean or American or Thai. They make us into noble people, people who lie beyond our culture and beyond our customs. And so these are the things, this is the Dharma that we want to bring here. We want to think of Keng's new title as Vinayatama Vite. Vinayatama, we bring the standards of the Dharma, we bring them here. Instead of bringing our standards and try to change the Dharma in the Vinaya, we take the Dharma in Vinaya and change our own customs, our own ways of behavior. And we take his name and use it as a lesson. Every time you think about it, we've got Keng, our first Singaporean monk, who's become a Ajaan. Think about his name, think about what the name means for your practice. Now you can think of one and gain benefit from it. And so, this title here is given not only to Keng, but consider that it was given to all of you as well. You as his supporters, one of the things they look for when they plan to make someone a Ajaan is look around, does he have any supporters? Or the people who live around him, are they inspired by his practice? So take it as a gift to you as well, as you're inspired by the Dharma, inspired by the Vinaya. And also everyone here will take their duties and make the Dharma first in your lives. One of the problems you usually have in a monastery is the question is who's going to be in charge of the monastery? Are the lay people going to be in charge or the monks going to be in charge? The lay people say, okay, we're the one that gives the money, we should be the ones who call the shots. The monks say, okay, we're the ones who have the status of wearing the robe, we should be the ones who call the shots. Okay, it's not, and when you think in those terms, all you can do is fight all day and all night and never come to any peace. You've said, okay, we're going to make the Dharma call the shots, we're going to put the Dharma first. What the monks say, what the lay people say, it doesn't matter who says it. If it's Dharma, then it's worthy of respect. If it's not Dharma, then it's not worthy of respect. So we take the Dharma and the Vinaya as our guide. Place things first, even beyond, above the fact that we are Malaysian or Singaporean or American or Thai. Remember that we are all human beings and we're all suffering. When I was in Thailand, staying with Ajaan Phra, someone once asked Ajaan Phra, why is it that a Westerner can become a monk? And he said, Ajaan Phra's response was, don't Westerners have hearts? Don't they suffer? And it's the same with all of us. We're all human beings. We all have our sufferings. We want to find a way out. So regardless of what our background is, the important thing is that we take the Dharma, the customs of the noble ones, and make those our standards by which we all behave. When we all hold to those standards, we can all live together peacefully and all benefit from the practice. So I'd like these words with a blessing for all of you, a blessing for Keng. We're all proud of the fact that, as I said, not only did you receive this title, we showed that people in Thailand can see goodness even if it's not Thai. And it's Malaysian, Singapore, and they recognize goodness when they see it. And as I said again, we're proud of the fact that he not only has the title, but he earned it, and he earned it not trying to get it, but simply out of the goodness that he's been doing for the past nearly 30 years now. So, blessings to all of you.
刚才我的第一位老师就是阿江家慧他是用英语呢跟你们解释一下这个被国王呢封为教宗的因缘那么我也会去重复这些名利地位的东西呢，对我们出家人来讲呢，名是人家名係人哋給嘅，假係自己丟所以今天呢，因为我们是一个出家人，那么因为在这个佛教的贡献里面呢，其实在我的脑海里面，完全呢没有去想过这些名利地位的东西。我出家的因缘呢，是因为我生病，我很苦。那个医生讲，你2020了，有谁会不害怕呢？对不对？所以一个害怕的人呢，一定会找一条出路。为什么呢？因为在医学的方面都不能够给你一个答案。在心灵的方面，我们是华人当然就有这个跳档去找这个降头师解这个解那个，解到乱了，越解越乱，不解不乱，到最后我就来到这个寺庙巴列来那么由于我们这边的善业比较强一下就能够呢有了这一本书呢，由这个张家玉我这个大恩人这个大恩人的大师父所翻译的《Keeping the Breath in Mind》打坐的书本。那么由于以前我们一个小的这个打坐班，在这个法雷来里面3、4个而已。从那个时候开始，我们来学打坐，没有老师没有出家人以前的东西不要讲很好笑的就慢慢的去学，慢慢打坐，有了这个信心呢过了6个月，这个心呢能够入定，那么这个入定的功德呢，给我想起应该出家了。你看，一个人，尤其是我们新加坡人，很渴望这些世外物，理所当然是人嘛应该有一间屋子很多的钱用很大辆的车对不对有一个很好的医疗设备。可是呢，这个只是能够呢给我们满足这个身体的需要罢了。可这个心的渴望，我们这个内心的要那个无止境的。你给他另外一个地球跟他讲那边有更好的地方。我看那些很有钱的人呢，会找办法呢，买一张呢机票。现在呢，他们已经发明到呢，有这个 rocket door。你看人的心吗？一定要往出去外面找那些呢，以为外面能够给我们内心呢满足，这快乐的满足感。那么在佛教里面呢，佛陀就跟我们讲， 这些呢，欲望上的满足呢，只是暂时性的，最重要是内心的。这个外面的，好像我们吃东西啦，天气热开冷气啊，睡那些很舒服的床啊，有这个甲骨西巴的这些东西，只是感官上的、外面身体上的感受而已。可是内心呢，我们的心呢，很枯燥，很饿，好像饿鬼道的众生这样一直在找。所以呢，我们就是必须呢，以佛陀的教导来开化自己的本性，由布施啊，从一个很计较啊，什么都不给啊，一毛都不拔那种，慢慢的学习做布施，慢慢的听到你的左右邻舍的人讲，守戒律很好呢。我自从去寺庙啊学打坐，听到那个佛法的开示之后呢，学习打坐守戒律，我老婆我的老公啊，慢慢的嘴巴会呱呱叫了，变成呢无彼此之间呢有一种信任，一种信用，因为我们是从这个内心里面开发出来，用这个戒定慧来修哪里，就是修这个心，开发自己的心，找到什么是佛陀所讲的真正的幸福一样的在哪里，是我们的这颗心。为什么呢？我们最大的财富就是这颗心。如果我们人什么都有，可是你的心不快乐，有意思吗？有意思吗？没有意思的。做人没有快乐，没有意思。这颗心的快乐呢，要创造出来。所以这些善业，由布施，由打坐，守好我们的戒律，就是我们的行为上，有很大的帮忙，很大的作用。对一个人活在这个世界上呢来讲，为什么？因为每个人好像现在你们在听的时候，你们的心很专注，对不对？你们的心呢，没有一切的杂念，没有调皮的心态。那么这个心呢，万法由这个心而起。你的身体的操从是要由这个心的起心动念，你的身体才会动。所以如果你们能够学习修心养性这个打坐的方法，来控制自己的心，那么每个起心动念的转化，它的方向你看得一清二楚。那么好的善业你去支持，内心起的这个妒忌啊，不善的心态你不好去做。可是你又不可以阻止你的心呢去起这个不好的念头。为什么呢？因为你还是一个人啊，一个凡夫啊。你有眼睛看到，耳朵听到，鼻子闻到，嘴巴舌头尝试到讲到，身体上的感官，而内心的想东想西，而排斥好不好，好不好这样。所以这个就是人。因为我们每次有学习打坐，每次有听闻佛法，去辨别这个起心动念的方向，那么我们这个做人的烦恼就慢慢的减轻，慢慢的开化自己的心呢，朝向这个善跟呢有利益的方向去走。为什么呢？你看那些你以前还没有接触佛法的时候，你是哪一种的人？摸一下自己的良心，现在问你自己。那么自从你接触佛法，接触呢善知识者，不只是出家人，就比如你们的朋友呢，人与人之间的这些善知识者呢，所给你的这些善言良语，那么你听的呢，对你的心呢是有很大的帮助。所以你看，每个人不管是什么众生都好，都需要人 性不一样的。可是这个性不一样的，从哪里去找呢？我们每个人活在这个世界上不到100年，离开了，只剩下这个心，跟我们这一生这一世呢所累积的善业或是恶业。那么这些善业跟恶业呢，没有人知道，你自己知道啊，因为全部呢完全的记载在你的心里面。那么这个心态呢，如果有善业的扶持，你能够依循好的善法，那么你就会往生善法。可是呢，如果你的心在这个刹那间呢，起这个憎恨的心态，或者呢不好的心态，那么会朝向哪个方向呢？去投胎呢？你自己心里明白哦。所以现在我们是人，还不是死人，还有这个机会呢，去做那个选择。就好像今天的这个庆典，真的，作为一个出家人，对我本身来讲，我是不用紧的。可是呢，对很多信徒，尤其是我们新加坡的华人、新加坡的子弟，新加坡人，而且是华人南传的佛教里面，你是第一位被泰国国王呢所封到的这个官位，是一个光荣。所以他们讲要庆祝一下，庆祝一下呢，他们也感到呢荣幸。那么我不用紧了，随缘又不是出自这个出家人呢来叫你们去做的。如果你们讲在明天听说15号乌鲁米拉有晚期出家，我们全部要去参加晚期出家，我会更高兴，真的会更高兴。那么你中了要剃头呢，手8戒你哇，会更高兴，比今天更高兴。今天的高兴只是一点点而已，真的，一点点。如果很多人出家去修行，不是为了我自己，是为了我们佛教的命根。我们这个新加坡不是今天，还有几十年、几百年、1000年的来临还在我们的前头。所以呢，我们新加坡必须呢要落根呢善法、正确的佛法来灌输呢给我们自己的新加坡人。那些学法叫你去拜鬼、拜东拜西那种，我们不要了。我们拜佛，信仰三宝，最上的。你知道这些护法神吗？他都有来拜佛陀。所以我们信的是佛，功德很大，连提公我们所拜的提公都要来呢拜访佛陀，你们懂吗？在经典里面记载的一清二楚。所以呢，今天这个庆典当然也是包容了一切的主天神的威护，一切的众生，我们的祖师大德。最重要的就是从佛的时代到现在200年以前呢，就是有我们这个森林派的罗普曼的传统慢慢下来到看破里，一代不一代。你看，如果这些祖师大德没有很严格的去遵守、去打坐、去净化、去修行呢，来留下这个善法、这个宝库，你以为呢这个善法会传到我们今天吗？我为什么会出家？因为我去到拉雍的时候，我看到看破佛就好像佛像一样坐在那边没有动了，我很感动我实在很感动。那么我去到那边，我要放全香，整间寺庙走到完没有一个添油香的。另外一个令我很感动就是这边，我就下来跟 我的老师张杰飞问他：“哎，你们这边没有费用的吗？”我们有。那么这个钱箱，我们没有拿钱的。哎呀，这个很感动啊！这种和尚好重要。这个是我们新加坡需要的这种和尚，因为我们看到的不是这种的，所以那个时候起我们就发了这个心愿，要把这个正法呢带回来。可是那时候因为要死的话嘛，没有想这样多，不知道还有没有这条命带回来，拼命的修咯，修到没有死了，可以回来了。回来之后，那么又很感动的看到了敬巴的好处，所以从美国去帮忙张杰飞3年之后，我回来呢，闪抵灵清寺呢，开发灵清寺。可是灵清寺呢，就很接近新加坡，而且马来西亚我们的人太好心了，很好，他们这个布施的能量，这个心力很强，所以是有时候会宠坏出家人那么我看到这一点不可以，我要找一个地方呢，去给我们更年轻的一代呢吃一点苦，给他们要的东西得不到，才能看到内心的起心动念。为什么呢？因为他讲OK， 什么现在 OK， 什么都 OK 的要什么都有，给他要什么都没有，给他乱了就是在38是最好的地方，因为新加坡你看软的，进到吧每个就打退堂鼓，因为没有 WiFi 嘛，没有东西给你玩，所以他们每个要进吧，好像去斩头这样的。你看佛陀的命根呢，不是 computer 这些玩具只是一个工具呢，给我们联络。我们不应该给工具控制我们应该控制自己的心，来利用这些工具来利益自己，而不是宠坏自己。所以我们就去38，去没有吃的地方，比较偏僻的地方，给老虎大象吓一下这颗心才会醒起来的话，不然的话，我们的心很放逸的，他以为什么都是应该的，没有感恩心我这样讲有的人会有一种很反感的心态，就是以为每个人像你这样呢，这样要经过这样的训练才能够领悟到法呢很多人会这样想的，为什么呢？因为他们怕死每个人是怕死。你应该呢问你自己，你有饿过吗？没有。你有冷过吗？没有。你有热过吗？没有。有迷失过吗？你有没有吃过白饭跟辣椒跟盐？要你的命我跟你讲，你讲你打坐厉害，试试看试试看。坐在这边这一点 aircon 不够强，呱呱叫你是投诉这个投诉那个，等一下这个没有哭这个呢，修什么行？回家睡觉修行就是要控制自己，每个起心动念就不要放过它。这个动念起的是什么？要跟我讨价还价做1个小时，你就给我讲这边痛那边痛，明天再做1个礼拜做1次就好。为什么？你怕做久了你会入涅槃你怕以后不会再来投生了，你以为这样容易吗？可是如果你给你自己有这个意志力，能够当得起这个挑战，你会看到很多不同的心态在你的内心会产生，你会很安稳很自稳。你有经过这样的训练，这个训练呢 给一个人的信心，在佛陀里面呢，有很大的作用。你不是为了名利地位而来弘法的，你是因为看到呢，这个内心经过这种考验，经过这些训练，导致这个内心的安详。这个内心呢，不需要外面的因素来导致这个内心的安宁啊，这样的你就有功夫啊。那么我这个身体，这个色身，跟我这一生这一世呢，在这个佛教里面的贡献，不管是在医药、食物、吃穿，跟呢在本地跟外地的一切的佛教的活动，一切的善业建寺庙啊，建路啊，都要你们的支持，所以也不会辜负你们对出家人的这个我会给你一个很好的交代，不会辜负，不会浪费你们的白饭，你不用怕啊，不会浪费你们呢这一路来呢所给的这个心灵的身心的支持，所以我在此呢感恩呢你们在家跟这个出家众呢所给的这一路以来的这些支持，我当下呢就跟你们讲萨埵萨。现在给一些纪念品啊。那么这个佛牌啊，是叫做尼兰达赖，尼兰达赖是ไม่มีอันตราย ，no danger， 没有危险，没有危险，驾车要小心啊，不是？他的这个speeding啊，没有危险，很危险的。排队，排队，排队。
够了吧？那你觉得不剪刀了？好，金华叫他们放过来。
请大家合作啊，跪下来，跪下来拿啊，要站住啊，跪下来，然后从这边进来，那边出去，这边出去，好不好？好，没事。OK， 从这边进来，这边出去，这边进来，这边出去。OK， 两排，好不好？啊，跪下来，跪下来。还有这个祝福的水哦，圣水，你们可以在那边拿哦。好，圣水在那边拿。你先过来这边。
ลงมาเดินคนท้ายแล้วเนี่ย
แล้วก็ถามว่าใครผิดใครผิด
all the helpers okay all the helpers ไปตุย
还没有拿的赶快来，来可以。
okay all the helpers go and take okay any more helpers go and take helpers come and take Right. Any more helpers? Any more helpers? Any more? I'll take that.
Thank you.
That's for Jerry 了，有人的。好了。
销售吧。对，但每个都5个，我就
Alright, I think we should now pay respects and leave the hall. 清华，pay respect.
我们一起顶礼国宝生的，然后我们要离开。
Let's use.
我们顶礼。
We pay respect to the Bante.
向师徒们三顶礼，ครับ。
回向功德哦。